April 1994. A suspicious plane crash kills President Habyarimana in Rwanda, Africa. Less than 100 days later, some 800,000 Tutsis tribesmen, women, and children are slaughtered by the Hutu majority as part of a campaign to wipe out the Tutsis group. As many as 2 million Rwandans fled the country, packing into makeshift refugee camps in Zaire, claiming their lives between 10,000 and 35,000 each month. Even with the United Nations mission to Rwanda, led by General Dallaire, the bad situation in the country turned into a world nightmare. The national community, Canada included, failed to prevent or suppress this atrocity and largely stood by while hundreds of thousands died in one of the most rapidly perpetrated and deadliest genocides in history. As a member of 2 failed ambulance, myself and a lucky another 120 other personnel arrived in Rwanda under the humanitarian aid mission designated Op Passage. Our mandate was to provide medical services to the refugees returning to Rwanda. I could never have imagined how this experience would change my life. I found myself in the middle of chaotic conflict zone where hostile fire, violent crowds, death, drugs, and disease all posed a risk to Canadian soldiers. Within a few days of my arrival, I was sitting in the back of an MLVW, probably the same one out back, traveling through the countryside. The ride was pretty quiet as I stared in disgust and disbelief. Death and destruction, with roads congested with people lined up by the thousands, carrying what little they had left of their lives. Those who could not walk died where they collapsed. Anyone who could would raise their hand from where they fell, begging for food or water. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." After what seemed like days on the road, we came to a stop beside an abandoned, burnt-out milk factory in this small village called Marur. Here, the children greeted us by the thousands, jumping for joy, cheering, and begging for cookies. I found it simply amazing how resilient these children were. One minute, witnessing or experiencing the horrors of genocide, and the next, laughing and playing. With its vast open fields, piles of garbage, worn-down fences, and broken gates, this burnt-out milk factory was going to be my new home for the next several months. On my second day, my good friend Jeff and I had been given a job to do: recover human remains located on our camp. We grabbed tarps, a cart, gloves, shovels, and face masks, similar to the ones you're wearing today, with scented cream smeared on the inside. We didn't get very far when one of the airborne security guys led us to a small structure, soon to be their living quarters. He tells me they can't move in until someone comes and removes the human remains scattered inside. Okay. As I look inside, it only takes a few seconds for my eyes to adjust. And there in the corner was a reminder of the tragedies that happened not so long ago. I see 2 bodies, tangled in what seemed to be a final tragic embrace, both decapitated. The flies and stench were so overwhelming that I turned away and quickly re-entered the sunlight, feeling vomit spewing from my nose and mouth. Jeff and I carefully removed the bodies into the cart and made our way to the back of the building where someone had found a severed head. The story I heard was that if you were not buried with the majority of your body, you didn't get to go to heaven. So Jeff and I tried to keep as many of the body parts together as we could. We never found the second head. We moved into a large potato field behind the main building across from a small crop of trees where the new cemetery was being placed. While walking along the first row of potato plants, I could smell the rotting bodies well before I could see them. Approaching them with caution, the first body was that of a young teenage girl, face down in the dirt, dressed only in a torn yellow dress. Her body was decomposing, and flies were everywhere and not easily scared when I shooed them away. Dogs had eaten the flesh and bones that poked from her poorly dug grave, and my heart squeezed a beat that almost hurts, and I didn't need a guidebook to tell me this is not going to be easy. My first thought made perfect sense. Jeff would hold the arms, and I would hold the legs, and together we would lift this young lady onto a cart. Murphy's Law kicks in. Under the weight of the body, the arms and legs pull apart, detaching from the rest of the body. The skin had sloughed off, leaving Jeff and I holding handfuls of rotting flesh. The flies, now panicking, are buzzing around us in every direction like a disorganized black fog. The smell was intense, and the putrid particles were getting into my eyes, my ears, my nose, and even my mouth through the sides of my mask. Not only could I smell it, I could taste it. I choked on the thickened air, trying not to inhale any more of the methane vapor cloud rising from her body. I ripped off my mask and vomit again. I added more scented cream under my mask and even put some up my nose. It burns, but it's much better than the stench. We carefully placed her extremities on the cart and decided to recover the rest of her with a shovel. It was much tougher than I thought, as most of the flesh was liquid and spilling off the shovel. 2 shovels didn't make the work any easier. We moved the remainder of the bones and flesh to the cart by hand, scooping some soil with her reins so her body would be as complete as possible. I can still remember the cold, dark stare this young woman's lifeless eyes had burning right through me, as if to never forgive me for the pain and suffering she endured. The next body was that of a small boy, curled in a ball with a spear stuck through his throat from front to back. His terrified expression and posture portrayed how he was taunted and tortured. His Achilles tendons cut, apparently to hobble him so he could not escape while he awaited death. In an instant, I was taken back, and whoever had taken his life from him had taken a part of my life as well. Throughout the morning, we recovered many more bodies, cut down where they lay, their arms and legs jutting out of the dirt, reaching towards the hot African sun. We kept digging, not knowing we were only meters from 2 mass graves. I cannot remember who found the first body next to the garbage pit, but it doesn't matter. It was something that I'll never forget. Initially, we thought there was only 1 body. We kept digging. We found 2, 3, 4, and more. I was digging around what I believed to be was a femur. It was tough to dig out as it was still attached to the rest of the body. I tried to recover as much as possible, keeping the body together, but this was becoming quite difficult. As I dug further, my hands and boots were getting covered in a soup of decaying flesh. Bones protesting my weight would crack beneath my feet. I would shift only to hear a cracking of another set of ribs. The stench and flies were unbearable, and the African heat simply exacerbated the horrors. Flesh and bones were clothing were sticking together, forcing me to pull harder to get them out. My mask kept sliding down my sweat-drenched face, leaving my nose and mouth exposed to accidental splashes or flicks of soup tossed from our shovels. After a while, I couldn't tell which body part belonged to which body. Some of the bodies are almost complete, others just a pelvic bone, spine, some ribs. I really tried to keep the correct body parts together, but with this tangled mess, that was becoming next to impossible. I was able to recognize the pattern of bullets or machete wounds on the arms, faces, and heads of these people. But what confused and hurt me the most, I couldn't find any of the wounds on the babies that were wrapped in traditional cloth secured to the mother's back. This meant to me that when the mothers were killed and thrown into this pit, the babies were left to suffocate, to die strapped to their mother's back, literally buried alive. How could people do this to another human being, let alone a baby? I reach over and lift one of these little packages wrapped so tightly, and as I stood knee-deep in human decay, I'm holding what appears to be a 5-month-old infant, roughly the same age as my 2 girls. Roughly the same age as my 2 girls back home, one being born only a few months ago. I tried not to picture my two girls for fear of associating them with this fucked up place. I was infuriated, and all I could think about was torturing and killing the bastards who did this to the babies and the mothers. My vision narrowed. I feel lightheaded. I'm going to vomit again. I had to get out of this pit and take a breather. I gently placed the baby on the tarp, sat down and cried there on the edge of this mass pit. Over the next couple of days, we recovered more bodies, and in the end, 41 souls were recovered from the first mass grave. Sadly, only 5 meters away, a second mass grave where another 40 souls were recovered. And to this day, I still don't know how many babies were recovered from the pits. I will never know, and I'm happy not to know. To work this pit of death is to walk through these people's last living moments. I see a pair of sandals, a checkered shirt, a small handmade bracelet. Who were these people, and why do they deserve this? They're gone now, laid out in rows in a farmer's field on the edge of a Rwandan town of Marua, waiting for the chance to be exhumed once again in hopes of catching their killers. Rwanda has been one of the harshest legacies of my military career, and witnessing the brutalities of the most horrific kind has left a deep and lasting impact on those who witness it. Rwanda has changed me. Thank you.